Now that the GA is back for Stranger Things, people are forgetting how fandoms work. Just because a ship isn't canon doesn't mean people aren't allowed to ship them. And just because your ship is canon, it doesn't make it better than anyone else's. What I think a lot of people fail to realize is that regardless if they make Byler like canon or not, people are still gonna ship Byler. We could have a whole Malevolent makeout scene and the season would end there, and I would still ship Byler. It's very clear that a lot of these people are not familiar with being in fandoms or how shipping works. It's time we use our brains. Thank you.
At the time of this recording, Stranger Things has been over for about 3 months and some change. And people have been making like video essays, making TikTok videos, talking about the finale, analyzing season 5 to oblivion. And needless to say, fans of Stranger Things are kind of like disappointed and pissed at season 5 in general. And then the general audience of Stranger Things isn't that disappointed. It's perfect to them because they just simply are just watching it every once in a while. And I've been slowly recruiting myself into the fandom, getting emotionally involved in some of the plot points, or really one plot point in particular, because I personally was just simply a casual viewer of Stranger Things. I remember watching Stranger Things in early 2021 and binge watching all 3 seasons. And by the time season 4 came out in 2022, I was pretty much all caught up, set, and I was on the edge of my seat, just like everybody else, watching season 4 and being just as amazed by that running up that hill scene with Sadie Sink, and that was iconic. Season 4, looking back, is my favorite season, mostly because I was more there. I was able to experience it. And by the time season 5 came out, I was excited. The marketing up to season 5 was very amazing. Well, the first trailer was it was very engaging. Gets you pretty pumped up and excited, oh my god, what's gonna happen? And the entire cast went on this whole world press tour, all giving the vibe of season 5 leading up to something amazing. However, everyone else had other plans on the show. And by volume 2 and the finale, things just start to go downhill really fast. Volume 1 started out pretty decent with some holes that, people had thought about. For example, the whole 18-month time jump. We could have just simply picked up where we left off, but unfortunately, we did the 18-month time jump. Needless to say, everyone is has mixed feelings about Stranger Things. I'm kind of on the fence. I personally have been racking my brain around what constantly went wrong, and I could make this an entire episode on what went wrong and all that stuff, but it's not really in my expertise because that's not really what I came on here to talk about. I'm mostly going to be talking about something else that's been going on that I've noticed since season 5 was premiering, months leading up to it, and then while Volume 1 dropped, something was happening in this fandom, and it made me kind of icky and more activated, per se. More triggered, I guess. I'm not really a person who heavily focuses on this type of stuff in fandoms. We're going to be talking about the Stranger Things fandom, more specifically shipping. It feels like in the months leading up to season 5 of Stranger Things, and maybe even 3 years ago too, And while season 5 was airing, everyone in the Stranger Things fandom has completely lost the plot on how fandom culture and shipping works. And it really activated me. I never personally cared so much about shipping in general. I like shipping. It's fun, but I never truly cared about it. I never watched a show really heavily focused on if a ship was happening. But because of Stranger Things and all this drama, I literally came in the middle of a shipping war in Stranger Things season 5 and literally got disappointed like everyone else. And even then, like everyone on like TikTok and Twitter was making such a big stink about this. I've I just oh my god. The ship in particular, I made an episode, and if you watched the last 2 episodes I put out in the last month, I was talking about Mike Wheeler's character, and I was talking about Malevolent and Byler. That's the two ships that we're going to be talking about a little bit. But it's really just about shipping in general. But the shipping war between Malevolent and Byler will go down in some online spaces as the shipping war of 2025. And no one won. No one won. Seriously, no one won. Well, I guess technically Malevolent won as the true as like the OTP of Stranger Things, but we're going to be simply talking about how the Stranger Things fandom has completely lost the plot when it comes to shipping and fandom culture in general. Because apparently we can't simply coexist and just ship who we want. We have to follow these very invisible rules, apparently. We have to follow canon all the time. Apparently. So, welcome to Let's Discuss. I'm your host, Nick Marshall, and let's just simply get into it. I'm going to be giving a brief history of fandom culture and shipping in general. According to Wikipedia, feminist scholar Adrienne Waidwitz cited the group Janeites, a devout group of readers of Jane Austen, to be the earliest examples of fandoms, often coming together and just simply talking about Jane Austen books. So it's simply like a book club. Later on in the 19th century, there are also groups of fans for the book Sherlock Holmes, even had public mourning periods when the character was killed off. Another example in that time were railway enthusiasts who got together to talk about their interest in locomotives. I personally would have liked to have joined that club too. Grew up watching Thomas and Friends. It would have been fun. In the earlier 20th century, in the 1930s, it became more apparent with science fiction fandoms where people would enjoy science fiction and would get together and talk about that and other fantasy genres. Then in the 70s, it transitioned into movies and TV, with its first notable example being Star Trek, and it was more apparent when fan fiction became even more popular. It was already a thing in the 19th century, but Star Trek was considered the first fandom where fan fiction was written and popularized in spaces. A lot of things that we know in general about fandom spaces were becoming more and more of a thing, like conventions. The Mia West convention, for example, held video rooms for people who were fans of movies and like music videos or like even TV shows to watch them and converse. And then anime and manga were also becoming a thing in the 1970s in China and Japan, and people in the US were leaking videos subtitled for themselves and their friends. And then music fandoms were also becoming a thing, with the Beatles becoming popular in the 60s, and then Elvis culture, and then Elvis Presley becoming popular. This gave even more like leeway up until modern times with Swifties and Hive Mind and Arianators and Beliebers. In general, like participating in fandoms can look like many different things, and they're very immersive, and they can be very immersive, such as like organizing online or in-person events, creating fan art, writing fan fiction, buying or supporting the show, movie, or their favorite artist's work. listening or reading everything about their favorite movie or show or celebrity. Fandom culture has always been that in general. People have always just been coming together, talking about their shared interests, and doing so in very different ways. Some people are very like passionate about it, and then some people are very like low key about it. I've personally have been in fandom spaces in a more casual way ever since I was 11 years old. To go more into like fandom culture, it revolves around shipping. To give more of an overview of how shipping in fandom culture works is that usually you have like 4 types of like ships or pairings. You have canon, fanon, crack ships, crossover, and there are like many more categories, but like it's you usually like see those 4 types if you're like or more on the if you're more like in the front, if you're more like if you're more like casual like fandom person, if you're more like a fan, if you're more like a calm fan, I don't know, I can't explain it. If you're more like casual about fandom culture, you're like in it but you're not like heavily immersed, there are more like crazy or more like wilder types of pairings, but it's usually these 4 types that most people would get into. There really isn't like a reason as to why people ship certain characters, because it's usually like, oh, they would look cute, or sometimes it's like it's more deeper, like the narrative of the story is like hinting at them getting together, and it's usually like it's either that or like the latter. And most of the time, if for more lighthearted reasons, it's just simply, oh yeah, they would look so cute together, and like, oh, what if this, like, that's where like the more fun part of like fandom and shipping comes in, like when the imagination takes place. And this is like where canon like fanon interact, because canon means like you're shipping the already established couple in the movie or show or book. You already like this pair, and so you're creating like more stories for them to like interact with. You're creating more worlds and stuff like that, and you're already like going off of like established like character like dynamics between these two. With fanon ships, which is simply fan created ships or ships hinted in shows but never followed through on, or potential couples, basically that's what fanon is. But anyway, usually that's where like your true imagination will like take fold. With fanon ships, people would create all types of things. It's more immersive. It's more fan art, more fan fiction, more stuff to like work with. Crack ships and crossover ships are more like chaotic and more like of a loose canon than fanon and canon ships, because just like fanon ships, it's similar as to how like the imagination will take more control. Like there's more to do with your imagination. They've already have like there have been like many infamous crack ships over the years, and I've seen like most of them. Some of the ships that came up were like Violet from The Incredibles and Wilbur from Meet the Robinsons. I remember like watching music videos. To this day, I remember watching 2 music videos about them that were my favorite. The first one it was to the song Just a Girl by I can't remember the band. It was to the song Just a Girl. It was if you know the song if you know the song that I'm talking about, it had the lyrics, "She's just a girl I'm looking for." And the other song was "Be My Bad Boy, Be My Man, Be My Weekend Lover, but Don't Be My Friend." That's usually that. Yeah, those were like the 2 music videos that I've watched on and off when I was little. I loved those music videos. It was so like fun. Like that's when I was really like getting into like fandoms like and shipping, and I didn't even know what it was. I just found it so fun. The next one was Elsa and Jack Frost. Elsa from Frozen and Jack Frost from Rise of the Guardians. The 2010s, when it came to like crack ships, was like wild. It was like wild. It was so wild. It was so crazy. But like it was more fun. We had fun. People were just simply having fun. And even recently in today's age, there was Regina George and Roderick from Diary of the Wimpy Kid. That was like a fun one. I was really on board for that one, because like it was just like they would look cute together. It's like a Wattpad story come to life. I've seen plenty of Wattpad stories based around that, low key. Fandom culture was like very fun, like very like casual, like and carefree. Then in the first seasons of like Miss Corona, fandom spaces grew in popularity. Grew due to like quarantine, everyone staying indoors, and we need something to do. It gave way to people like going back into their childhoods and like watching their favorite shows again and movies because again we're in quarantine and we need something to do, and you can only be getting drunk so much throughout the day before you just gotta like focus on something else. Lord knows, I could have used a drink in 2020. Anyway, we all got into like our vices, our TV shows. I've definitely like remember so much of like quarantine. The whole reason why fandom spaces grew in quarantine was just simply nostalgia. This led to people like buying more games, like Among Us and Animal Crossing, and and like watching more nostalgic content like Twilight, Avatar, The Last Airbender, and Harry Potter. And fans heavily utilized online spaces for comfort and community, with significant increases in anime, fandom, and fan driven social activism. I remember that too. Again, quarantine. Everyone's bored. We need something to do. And not everyone was getting drunk. So what will you do? We went online, watched our favorite movies and TV shows, we found some fan fiction, we read it until dawn, chatted up with strangers online. Back to the whole topic of like shipping. When it comes to like shipping, its history does go back to Star Trek, with people liking the pair Kirk and Spock. A lot of shipping in fandoms are queer. Queer ships in general are just more popular in fandom spaces than straight pairings for a specific reason. However, it's kind of like a 50-50, I feel like, when it comes to like straight ships and queer pairings, because there were like a lot of straight ships in the 2000s, a lot. And by the 2010s, queer ships started to become even more popular than it was in the 2000s, because people were like shipping just as much. Okay, people were like shipping a lot of queer people. Okay, people were like shipping a lot of queer pairings in the 2000s as much as it had like a huge influx in the mid by the 2010s. Queer ships are more like popular in fandom spaces for a good reason. In the 20th century, the film industry had a censorship that they had to follow for all of their films, lasting from the mid 1930s to the late 1960s, called the Hays Code. One of the things that they couldn't show was queer people in any positive form of light, and if they did, they had to suffer or die in the end, because at the time homosexuality was considered a mental illness and you could get arrested, you can lose your job, you can be denied a mortgage. It wasn't a good time. So when it came to media, a lot of queer people in the 20th century never got to see themselves on screen or in books explicitly. They had to rely on a lot of subtext such as queer coding from authors and creators use to work around the Hays Code, which gave way to a lot of ships like Kirk and Spock in Star Trek. So it's really surprising when Stranger Things heavily hinted at the possibility of Mike and Will even getting together, that people were this triggered and pissed off about it. Even if you shipped Mike and Will on a lighthearted level, like you didn't really think they were going to be endgame, you just shipped them for fun, people were like very activated and triggered, which gives way into the many problems in the Stranger Things fandom. One of the many things. The Stranger Things fandom has always had a history of being ashy and toxic, but when season 5 was being released, even before then, people were forgetting their home training and manners. The obvious complaints have been the homophobia for people who shipped Byler, the romantic pairing between Mike and Will. I've seen comments of people being completely rude and even calling people delusional or mentally ill for just simply liking a pairing in TV. It's one thing to not like ship characters yourself and be like, you know what, I don't really see it. But it's like a whole other thing to call people mentally ill for shipping two characters together. Unless they're shipping an adult with a kid, I don't see the problem. I've seen a lot of this. The reason why people were like shipping Mike and Will in the first place is because From the first season, people were thinking that Mike had a crush on Will. And also, they've heavily emphasized how Mike and Will's relationship is so different from their dynamics with Lucas and Dustin. And they've constantly emphasized how much they cared for each other. We've shown there was a huge emphasis on Mike's reactions to Will, his urge to protect him. He's like the only one who gets Will outside of his mom and brother. All this stuff. And it's heavily emphasized how this bond, this pair, is something that audiences should pay attention to. And it should show that requires you to actually look that deep into things in the show. And you can't really just put it on in the background. Well, you can, but you're not gonna get every single thing right away. Everything is very intentional. So by season 4, it became a huge possibility that a love triangle was forming. Everything is very ambiguous on Mike's part, and we see the bond. The yearning is happening. And Mike's at a huge, he's having a full-on, low-key having a full-on gay crisis at some point. And by season 4's ending, and the months leading up to season 5, people were like, shit, this is actually gonna happen. Let's do something about it. We're gonna bully people. And that's what happened. There are other queer ships in the show, like Jonathan, the pairing of Jonathan and Steve, and Ronance, the pairing between Robin and Nance, and Steady, the pairing between Steve and Eddie. And they don't get a hate from fans because it had no chance of actually happening on screen, but Byler did, and it was triggering. Why? Because of the fact that, well, number one, people hated Will, and it's also just simply the sight of a gay couple actually happening in a mainstream show. That's what triggers them the most. Oh my god, they're forcing gay people onto TV. What are we gonna do? Oh my god, and it makes you want to roll your eyes. Then there's also the racism towards actors and characters in the fandom. You thought I was going to be focusing on the homophobia, but no, we're going to go into the racism too. Caleb McLaughlin had talked about his experiences of dealing with racism from fans in the past. There are some articles I'm going to be reading the Teen Vogue article because he talked a little bit about that. It's an article by writer Caitlin McNabb, and she was writing about Caleb's It's a Teen Vogue article. It's a Teen Vogue article by writer Caitlin McNabb, and it details Caleb talking about his experiences dealing with the racism from fans in TV shows. It says right here, and I quote from Caleb, "It definitely took a toll on me as a younger kid. My very first Comic-Con, some people wouldn't stand in my line because I was black. Some people told me, 'Oh, I didn't want to be in your line because you're mean to Eleven,'" Caleb said in the clip, referencing Lucas's hesitance towards Eleven in the show's first season. "Even now, some people don't follow me or don't support me because I'm black." Another quote from him says, sometimes overseas, you feel the racism, you feel the bigotry," continued Caleb. "Sometimes it's hard to talk about that and for people to understand, but when I was younger, it definitely affected me a lot." Another quote, "You're like, why am I the least favorite? Why don't I have followers? I'm on the same show as everybody from season 1, he said. But then my parents had to be like, it's a sad truth, but it's because you're the black child in the show." As noted by People, it says Caleb currently has over 15 million followers at the time the article was written on Instagram, and is still the least followed member of the main young cast on the platform. For additional context, series star Millie Bobby Brown has 58 0.5 million followers, and Sadie Sink, who joined the main cast during season 2, has almost 25 million followers. It says also here, I'm going to be knowing this too, that for years black actors in major sci-fi and fantasy projects have endured racist vitriol from their fandoms, including fandoms of Doctor Who, Percy Jackson, and the Olympians, Star Wars, CW's The Flash, Vampire Diaries, The Walking Dead, and most recently, Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. Racism in fandom affects both the fans and the actors, who are all human beings first and foremost. I would also add that, like, black people are nerds too, okay? Black people are geeks about TV shows and movies too. Like, I am a black kid. I grew up constantly immersed and obsessed with, like, animation TV shows, watching so many, like, old TV shows. Like, I remember, like, watching so many, like, Looney Tunes cartoons. I remember being into, like, Monster High, MLP Friendship is Magic, the Powerpuff Girls, Thomas and Friends. I remember just simply, like, being so immersed. Oh, and the Fairly Odd Parents too. Like, I remember being so immersed and, like, so obsessed with, like, animation in particular, and just, like, wanting to learn more and, like, getting more into the lore of the show. I was that nerdy black kid in the past, and it does feel kind of, like, isolating to feel like you're the only person who, like, enjoys these things, because you're not interested in interested in, like, the stereotypical things, and it's not like it's not interesting to you, but, like, you're just, like, more interested in this. It's like, it feels like fandom spaces are, like, very, like, not welcoming to other black and POC people, because it feels like white people who are fans in fandom spaces don't really want to share the space. Like, I also was, like, getting, like, really into DC. Like, when I was, like, 12 especially, I was getting into DC. I love Batman, still do. But, like, when you don't always, like, see yourself in the comic book spaces too, because, like, it can get pretty, like, isolating when there's not, like, a whole lot of, like, black characters. Like, we have Miles Morales, we have some versions of Green Lantern, we have Static Shock, we have Black Panther. My uncle was an 80s kid, and he probably didn't, like, grow up with a whole lot of black superheroes back then too. So, like, a lot of black kids were nerds too. So, like, going through fandom spaces, you don't really, like, feel represented already, and then, like, to go in these mostly white predominated little fandom spaces and sometimes feel like you're being talked over when you, like, share your experience of, like, how, oh, and when you, like, say, like, oh yeah, I relate to this character too, and then, like, it's like that. There's, like, this coldness. Racism still happens. Like, it happens in fandom spaces with all the stuff that Caleb experienced, that he's also, like, the only black boy in the cast, and he was reduced to being the white character's boyfriend when he's been an active main cast member since season 1. Even though Max and Lucas are, like, a great couple, Lucas's arc is reduced to just simply being Max's boyfriend when he has other characteristics to him that have made people love him. He's very logical and can be steady force. He's very he's very logical, and he can be, like, an easy steady force when his friends are being kind of, like, dramatic and reactive at times and not really, like, thinking first. Mike, really, and Dustin. And he's just as smart as Dustin and Mike too. In season 4, we see his struggle trying to, like, fit in with the jocks, and it's worth noting that he was also, like, one of the 2 other black players on the team, and they're in, like, he's in the Midwest, and he's mostly, like, in a predominantly white area. So it would have been knowing to, like, touch base on that, how it's been rough for him too, because he's in a small town, so obviously he's gonna experience a lot of racism. Obviously, if his family does too. Like, we never really, like, experienced that. And the whole conversation, like, with Billy, it was sort of like, that's the only time we actually, like, see a little bit of, like, what he goes through to an extent, but it still wasn't, like, touched on really. But needless to say, the fandom can be racist at times, They can sideline characters. They can be homophobic towards Will. They can be racist towards they can be racist towards Lucas and like downplay the fact that Billy was racist. They can like do all these things, and they like the Stranger Things fandom is very ashy for that. They're very ashy, extremely. This is the part where some might roll their eyes. This is the part where some people might roll their eyes a little bit, but this is where I defend people who ship Mike and Will. What makes the fandom etiquette in general complete ass in Stranger Things is people's over-explaining of how Mike and Will are just friends and bother shippers are just simply mentally ill for thinking that they are being hinted at becoming a couple, or just simply liking the pair in general and shipping them on a surface level, like, oh, they will just simply be cute and moving on. Again, if you don't like the ship, that is completely fine. It's whatever. But it's very telling that you get so triggered by a ship that you have to like willingly look up Reddit spaces, videos on TikTok, Tumblr's accounts, YouTube videos, and leave comments like very like ugly, mean comments. And they're like, especially like going online and saying that you'll literally go down to Atlanta and burn down the set of Stranger Things if Mike and Will become a couple. Like, it's very telling, like, that your people are so triggered by this that they would literally threat violence. They would literally threat arson if that happens. Oh my god. I would say this about Malevolent. I feel like people are going to assume I'm very biased in it, but I'll say this. Again, this is coming from a casual viewer of Stranger Things. When I was binge watching that show in 2020 and oh god. When I was binge watching that show in 2021, I was indifferent to Mike and Eleven then. I was indifferent to Malevolent then, and I'm indifferent to it now. I can look back on that and just say simply that. I was not really paying attention to Mike and Eleven like that, because of the fact it was just simply any other ship. It was typical. It was just simply a typical ship. It wasn't really that eye-catching. Even if Malevolent was a slow burn romance, and if that was truly the case, if Malevolent was truly like the OTP, the true endgame of Stranger Things, then just simply do a slow burn and just let it be. But the thing is, like, even if it was like a slow burn, we would all see it coming anyway because of heteronormativity. Heteronormativity would make us see right through the slow burn and be like, yeah, Mike and Eleven are going to get together anyway. Even if they do like the whole slow burn of like, oh, Mike doesn't like her at first, and then like they slowly go and they're like growing as friends, like we will just see it. We'll just see it from a mile away. So it wouldn't really be that interesting. It would be cute, but it would be very typical, like something we've seen a million times. So it's not really going to be that, and it's not really going to be that, all that. Cute, yes, but like it just wouldn't be all that. However, you see a story like Mike and Will. You see this common trope that we've seen a million times, childhood best friends to lovers, but the only difference is it's with two boys. And you're using the same trope, but not everyone's going to see it right away. And by close to the series finale, it becomes more and more apparent, and people are noticing it more and more, and they're like, oh my god, it's happening. And it's like, people are like, oh my god, this is so genius. And that was like the more interesting story, because like Stranger Things being like a queer love story in disguise of a supernatural show, that is that is like a good story. That's a hook. That is the true hook. That's how you get people locked in. It wasn't really a show about explicitly like being queer, even though like you have two queer main characters, one canon, one queer coded. You have this happening, and you don't really like follow through on it. And it was saved the Duffer Brothers' writing credibility by the skins of their teeth, by following through with it. Because on a narrative level, it wouldn't have made sense for Will to have been in love with Mike for the majority of the show for a long period of time and not have it play and not like I don't know and not let it happen. It's not really like satisfying narratively to just let it drag on and not let anything happen. Let me add this. With Mike and 11 being like the apparent true OTP, everyone like marketing it as such, the whole PR package is like trying to like make it seem like, oh, they were like the true OTP. They don't treat it as such. Like like they have such an ambivalence. To say that there's no possibility of Mike ever returning Will's feelings and with and to say like this is really just an unrequited crush, it would mean you would have to ignore previous seasons of Mike's behavior towards Will. It would mean having to ignore the constant parallels between other canon couples in the show, like Nancy and Jonathan, Hopper and Joyce, Robin and Vicky, and even like Steve and Nancy in comparison too. Like, and also ignoring the promotion during season 4 and 5, the many tropes used between Mike and Will, childhood best friends to lovers, the 80s girl next door, the Cyrano trope, the will they won't they trope, the love triangle, camera angles, lighting, Mike's whole love confession in season 4, if you ignore the many holes Mike's love confession has in season 4. Especially with him saying like, oh, my life started when I met you in the woods, and I loved you from the day I met you. And it's like a whole contradiction. And the fact that by the end of the show, 11 knew Mike was kind of like lying a little bit, and they weren't even like talking by the end. It would mean having to ignore all that stuff. Also, you would have to ignore the fact that you would have to ignore the many facial expressions that Finn Wolfhard was like directed to do. You would have to like ignore so much to say that. And if your only rewatching of the show was season 3, the most popular season, it would make sense. Like on a surface level, it would make sense to say that, oh, Mike and Will are just friends and this is unrequited and like there's no possibility of Mike returning his feelings. If you're not like looking that deep into Stranger Things, it would make sense to say that Byler is unrequited, it had no build up, and there's no trope being used. People are just like getting their hopes up. And it would make sense to say that on a surface level. It was queerbaiting. The worst examples of queerbaiting in history. I actually was there to witness the gaslighting, the bullying, all the righteous shit that people were like, oh no, that's not queerbaiting. We're taking this way out of hand. Oh, it's not queerbaiting. Especially like other queer people were actually like saying that, oh, this isn't queerbaiting. I was there for Clance. I was there for Sherlock. Again, this would make sense. Like on a surface level, this sense, like all their claims would make sense if you weren't looking that deep into Stranger Things. If you're not really that immersed with how coding and like TV, what goes on in TV actually like works, and like how like storylines like work, like how everything is intentional within TV because it's scripted. It's like everything is scripted and TV. Like sometimes improvisation happens, but like it's so rare that it does, because most of the time everything in TV is intentional. So it would make sense that on a surface level, if you're not looking that deep into it, to say, oh, it's not all that, it's not that deep. but it was that deep. All of it was hinting at it happening. But some queer people were trying to like play the queer baiting Olympics and saying like, oh, well, that's not queer baiting. That's anyway. All of it was very pick me behavior. It was very pick me behavior because I've seen Sean Levy. I've seen Sean Levy like intentionally like post intentionally like post clues, especially like his Insta story posts before Volume 2. I was there. I've seen it with my own eyes. People were not making this shit up. They weren't. They really weren't. People were not making this up out of nowhere. Byler didn't come out of like it wasn't some fan creation coming out of nowhere. It came out of the fact that people thought that Mike had a crush on Will. Also, even if Mike and Will's relationship wasn't really like the central theme of the show, they had other love interests, people would have shipped them regardless. People would have shipped them regardless. And it just wouldn't have been a big deal. But the fact of the matter is, because of the fact that their relationship is central to the show, the fact that Will is canonically in love with Mike, the fact that Mike treats Will differently than the others, the fact that Mike does care about Will in a romantic sense, yes, I'm saying it in a more matter-of-fact canon way because it's written as such. He's not really a straight character. He's a very queer-coded character, and it makes more sense. Whenever I argue about whenever I argue about Byler in general, I'm mostly arguing about it on a narrative level, like for the story's sake, because of the fact that that's what it seemed like in the story that's what they were going to do. I don't personally care about the shipping the sipping aspect of it. Like, oh, well, I just simply like them together. I'm not really arguing for it. I'm not really arguing about it on that stance. I argue about it on the story level. Like, that's just simply how the story was going. That's how it seemed like it was going. And so much of the plot was tied around their dynamic. It wasn't the only plot. It wasn't like the only thing about the show, but it was one of the main things about the show. And it not happening kind of was like one of the things that ruined the finale. I do think that there are some bad eggs in that whole Byler community, which is understandable. There are some bad apples in communities. Like there's always going to be some people who make everybody else look like they're crazy, like make them look like they're weirdos. Like there's always going to be some people bringing the party down, and there are some people in the Byler fandom who are kind of like creeps and weirdos. So it's not all sunshine and rainbows, and it leads to a lot of like infighting in the fandom. So I was being very nosy. I've been very nosy, mostly on Twitter, because apparently my Twitter, since Stranger Things came out, my Twitter I've been seeing nothing but tweets about Stranger Things ever since season 5 came out on Twitter about it. And people who ship Byler are going into many different directions ever since the finale. Some people are going back on the ship in general, or like, okay. The most like notable ones are the people who are hating on Mike Wheeler, people who are projecting roles onto Mike and Will, and Lawless Byler. We'll get a little bit more into that, but yeah. And also just simply like it's just anyway, we'll get into it. Okay, first up, the Mike Wheeler hate. It's one thing to like be annoyed. Like, okay, so I've been seeing a lot of like influx and people hating on Mike Wheeler ever since Volume 2 and the finale, saying like, oh, so he was just simply an asshole for no reason, and he's just simply homophobic, he's a jerk, and like Will deserves better. And I understand. I understand with taking this very like half-assed approach of Mike Wheeler from the Duffers at face value. I understand that approach. I understand. It's one thing to like be annoyed with Mike's actions, and I am personally like annoyed by his actions in season 4, especially. I am still kind of like pissed at the airport scene and the Rinkomania and his behavior at Rinkomania. I am personally pissed. Like, if I think about it too much, I get pissed off a little bit. Believe me, I do. But I don't really like. I don't. Ever since the finale, I don't really like take the whatever the Duffers say as seriously as I might have used to. I don't really think I'd have, but I don't really like accept this canon per se, because it's looking at Mike Wheeler through a very surface level lens. It's ignoring the fact that there is complexity to his character. It's ignoring the fact that he and Will do have a very special relationship. It's ignoring the fact that all these clues are there, and it's still there. They just never followed through with those clues. It's ignoring the fact that he is still a very nuanced character. He's a very nuanced queer character, whether it be canon or not. There's still people who heavily relate to Mike who did feel affected by his ending in the finale. And believe me, there have been a lot of people who have cried and have been scared to end up like Mike. There are many people who just simply like relate to his story. I relate to his story too. And it doesn't change the fact that like he's not perfect, and like he's just simply like a very complex, imperfect character. And I'll say this: would it be more interesting if Mike was just simply a very like perfect character? Would it make it interesting if he said the right things all the time? Like, no, it wouldn't be that interesting. It wouldn't have been that interesting. The automatic shift towards Mike is very noteworthy, with people like going on TikTok and saying like, oh, Mike Wheeler is the worst person, he's like Satan, like he's all this and that, reducing him in general to just like always reducing him on both sides to just simply being someone's boyfriend, and not really acknowledging him as his own character, because outside of Ellen Will, he is his own character. And yes, so much of his characterization is his character arc is connected to Will as much as Will's arc is connected to Mike. Their storylines are incredibly intertwined, and it's only reserved for romantic pairings that their arcs is so entwined. But like, he is still his own character with his own personality, with his own character traits, and his own story that we needed to like see. We needed to see more of like what was going on in his mind, how he represses his emotions, how he deals with like internalized homophobia and compulsory heterosexuality, how he's not really good at feelings, how he pushes people away at times, how he also doesn't really have someone who how he feels like he doesn't have someone who he can personally like lean on. We could have like seen more of his relationship with Nancy, because like we needed to see more of like their sibling bond too, just like how we saw Will and Jonathan's bond. Like, we could have like dealt with so much, but like everyone just wanted to like reduce him as to someone else's partner. And I personally, I feel like his relationship with Will could have given him more nuance, as it already does. But like the automatic shift towards just simply hating Mike Wheeler, it does come from a place of frustration, but like it kind of like gives me kind of like, it's very nowhere. It's very. It makes me see. It seems like a lot of people are very contrarian with their opinions and views on TV. Like, they just simply go with whatever is popular, and they just simply not really like sticking to their own opinion. They're not really like forming their own opinion on Mike in general. And it's just very telling. It's very telling. And people are just simply infighting and just simply doing that. And they just simply are just hating. Like, it makes no sense to just simply say, oh, you ship Byler, but you don't like the other half of the pair. It doesn't make sense. Like, yeah, Will is the most traumatized character. He suffers a lot, and you want to see him happy, and I do too. But, you know, it would make sense to like want him to be happy with the person he loves the most, and he's already canonically in love with Mike, and Mike already loves Will. So like, let's just keep that happening, you know, like, and also like you can ship them with other characters, it's fine. But yeah, it's just whatever. It's just whatever. But yeah, it's just noteworthy of how we want complex characters. It's really telling how we want complex characters, but when we do get them, we do recoil because we expect the flawedness to be filtered in a way, but still comfortable. But when it's not filtered and it's uncomfortable, and it kind of like it gives us, it makes us so scared to like face our demons. Sometimes. Yeah. On to Lawless Byler and gender roles. So these two are kind of like intertwined. This is just simply it's just simply some people, some straight women in this fandom are kind of getting too comfortable talking about and they're getting a little bit too comfortable, as if they're getting a little too comfortable with talking about the intricacies of like gay sex and how it works, like, and the nuances of it, even like, you know, it's fictional ship, and even how queer men identify and present themselves. Like, they're getting a little bit too comfortable with that. And I'll say this, like, your headcanon is valid in its own way, and I'm not going to take that away from you. It's whatever. Again, you're grown, you're old enough, people are going to think what they want to think. It's whatever. So it's not really an attack on you. I do have to point out that some of these headcanons I see on Twitter, because that's where the craziness happens, it kind of like, it does misrepresent the characters. For starters, Will is not an ultra feminine, matcha drinking, pop girl listening Regina George twink. He's not. He's really not. I've heard that he is gender nonconforming. I've seen that, yes. I'm going to acknowledge that. I acknowledge that. But even then, his style is still sort of like mass presenting a little bit, with some light pastels in his colors. Like, in some of his wardrobe, he still wears like very like bright colors. Like, he's still like likes those stuff too, but like he's still like pretty much mask presenting in general. Like, he's really like a nerd. Like, he's really just simply a nerd. He likes bands, he plays D&D, like, and he likes art too. Like, he's just simply a nerd. He's not really like ultra feminine, and he does have feminine traits, I guess, but like, he's not ultra femme, he's not hyper feminine, and, you know, it's not a bad thing. It's not really like, it's not like the worst thing for him to be. Like, I'm not saying it out of a place like that, but he's like, it doesn't, I feel like it just he's just not really a Regina George gay person. He's not a Regina George gay, is what I'm trying to say. Number two, Mike isn't some super hyper masculine straight guy fantasy that you think gay guys want. I mean, like, some gay guys want a straight guy fantasy, but that's not the case. That man is also a nerd. And Mike doesn't even fit into masculine or feminine stereotypes like Will. In season 4, we see a more androgynous look with him, with his own like lesbian haircut. We see that, but like, he's not really that. He's not really like giving that. Like, Mike is just simply a nerd, and they will experiment. I feel like they would experiment with a lot of their presentation and be more comfortable with them themselves. But like, they're not really like those versions, those hyper versions of like those people like fit into like, anyway, they're not really those, it's not like that. It's just not. I'm not even gonna go into the whole. I'm not gonna go into the whole like top and bottom discourse, but I am going to say this: straight women and even queer women shouldn't really heavily debate too much on what goes on in an MLM, man loving man dynamic, and just simply, if you're writing fan fiction, just simply write what feels natural and just simply move on. But like, don't heavily debate on this too much because it's not really like your area. Last but not least, I'm going to be talking about representation in general and just simply close this out. Representation is important. It really is. TV and film is not going to solve all of our problems in the world, but I'm not going to act like the media people consume doesn't have an impact, because it does. Stranger Things did some good things in showing representation on Robin's coming out and the speech and sorcerer, but they really did make a 180 and make it seem like queer people have to accept crumbs and representation. They really did make it like a whole. Okay. They really did make a whole 180 and make it seem like queer people have to accept crumbs and representation and make it seem like there's only room for like one queer couple in the show, and as if like it has like to make it seem like there's only room for one queer couple, as in to check off some, as if they need to like make some checklist to have to like check off points for diversity when it comes to like mainstream shows, and make it seem like self-acceptance and being rejected is more realistic. There is a world where you can appreciate something and you can critique it. And Will Byers' story has some positive qualities. It does. But there's also, unfortunately, a whole lot of negative. The fact that he was the only main character who never got an actual love interest, when he said that he'll never fall in love, and that was made like an important part of his character arc, that he wants romance and he wants to feel accepted, and he wants both of these things. He wants self-acceptance and he also wants the love of his life, Mike Wheeler. And that was, both of those things can go hand in hand. It's not like it's not like a mutually exclusive thing. Like, you can have romance and you can have self-acceptance. It can be like that. What makes it worse is that the show goes as far as to constantly like prove him right, that Will's unlovable and like he's never gonna find anyone, and like he like the show really does prove him right in the end. And even before you say like, oh well, he has a epilogue boyfriend, that's not even like real. That's just simply Mike's imagination. So we don't really like know. So yeah, it is pretty messed up that he it is pretty like messed up that he was the main character, was bullied, essayed, kidnapped, forced to come out, humiliate and reject themselves in front of everybody, all in the name of realism. And it's not entitled to say that they could have done more. They could have, like, it's not entitled to say that they could have done better with Will's story. They could have, because it's almost worse than bury your gays trope. It's almost worse, because not everybody will notice that their representation when it came to Will was messed up. I was like saying this before I recorded, like, Will might as well have just died, because then people would have like woke up to see how this portrayal of like this portrayal as a gay character was messed up. It was like but instead, like, they did it so subtle that not everyone's gonna notice how they did him dirty, and they're just gonna like wave people off and dismiss people who critique it and say like, oh well, there's already like a gay couple in the show, like you're being misogynistic, and like, oh, like whatever, and like Will's the worst, and like all that stuff. But it's still messed up that all this happened. And you can acknowledge that, like, there are some positives in his representation, but the negatives of it kind of overshadow it. And a lot of people who relate to both Mike and Will are going to internalize the more negative aspects of their portrayal. Anyway, people who watched that coming out scene, I never watched it in full, but it did make me feel sick to my stomach too. Because, like, it was just so messed up. The circumstance was messed up. The fact that I thought, the fact that it didn't, I feel like it didn't really need to happen. Even so, it should have been like him with his mom and Jonathan, and then Mike was walking and he overheard, and that's what should have happened. But people who watched that coming out scene reported feeling more ashamed and upset with themselves than they already would have, because it was just simply reiterating the already negative thoughts that they're already thinking about themselves. And along with, like, people being scared of ending up like Mike too, like, they're going to, like, some of them are going to internalize the more negative aspects than the positive aspects of their representation. But overall, the attitude in the Stranger Things fandom when it comes to shipping is toxic. I shouldn't feel like seeing something relating to Mike and Eleven is sort of like Republican MAGA coded, but it kind of is, in my opinion, because the fandom made such a stink about Mike and Will even getting in together in general. Like, they made such a huge stink. They made so much. They bullied so many people, and it just made it. It feels political. Like, they made it like it felt too political. It got way too political too fast. It already, like, it went there. It just went there. But yeah. I shouldn't feel like this. I don't know. Like, it shouldn't have felt like watching season 5 shouldn't have felt like this anxiety-inducing, like, constant, like, wondering, like, oh, like, is this going to happen or not? Like, I shouldn't have to, like, prepare myself constantly, like, for disappointment of, like, Mike and Will not being together. Like, I shouldn't have to, like, do all that, because I'm not really a person who's really, like, invested in ships in a particular way. Some of the ships that I like didn't happen, and I was fine with it. I was like whatever. But when it came to this, I wasn't. And it's crazy. And, like, Byler not happening in the queerbait did hurt my feelings in a way. I have to acknowledge that. It did hurt my feelings. And I was just, like, disappointed. Like, it did. But, yeah. I don't really know how to, like, end this off, but I can say, I don't know. It's hard to, like, end this off because, like, it feels like, I don't know. Yeah. But, like, I shouldn't have, I don't know. Anyway. But shipping in general is supposed to be fun. Like, it's supposed to be fun. And the Stranger Things fandom completely, like, lost the plot because, like, people should ship whoever they want. Fandom culture is supposed to be, like, more like a fun, accepting space, but, like, it turned into a quickly toxic and, like, dangerous place, low-key, for some people. And people shouldn't be bullied or be called mentally ill for simply liking a ship. They shouldn't. Like, it's disrespectful. It's rude. And I hope that in the future, if we ever, like, get another pair like Byler, that maybe people would learn from this and not be so ashy. They remember fandom etiquette. They can remember that, like, they don't have to, like, go along with the ship. They don't have to, like, if they don't like something, they can just simply ignore it. They don't have to, like, do all this extra stuff. Hopefully people in the future could learn that they can just simply ignore things and just simply mind their own business. Hopefully. But anyway, yeah, that's all I have to say on that. So yeah, thank you for listening to Let's Discuss. If you like this so far, you can give it a like, leave a comment. Yeah, this was just simply me yapping about this. Yeah. But anyway, if you liked it, leave a like, comment, subscribe. You can listen to Let's Discuss on Spotify or anywhere you can listen to Let's Discuss on Spotify or anywhere you stream podcasts. You can follow the podcast on Instagram and TikTok at Let's Discuss Podcast _. You can follow me, Nick.Marshall02. And yeah, hope you guys have a beautiful rest of your day, week, month, year. And and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. All right. All right. Bye.